quite interesting, quite documented in at different ages and different places. You have Design for Change in India too, that some of you might know, where you can start with kids. We have the Savanturier in France, we have Escuela Nueva in Colombia. All those methods are always the same, trying to try to bring this solving ability to the kids and nurture it so that they can grow SDGs. So then you're in a space where you navigate the space of the problems of mankind, and as a kid or as a student or as a citizen, you can find some interesting resources to learn more about the problems that you're interested in. You can find linkages between what you have, what you're interested in, and the other SDGs or the other problems, and you can try to learn about the complexity and the interrelations between the different issues, which is one of the key problems when someone tries to address the SDGs. So in that space, you can get the pedagogy resources, you can have MOOCs, you can have courses, the different university programs if you want to learn on specific things. You can also have internships or jobs, or in fact, whatever that you are thinking when you want to work on a specific project. As it is today, one has to do all the different steps in different spaces with different organisms, and Google cannot solve it all, because most of the time you rely on the knowledge of a specific mentor that knows exactly where to find the solution. This should be externalized, this should be projected on the web so that you can engage much more people, creating some sort of a citizen science for SDGs if you want, where everyone would be able to contribute, because you could invite people to engage in specific problems or issues that you're interested in as a researcher or as a practitioner or as a policymaker. So in a way, what we propose is to reframe the web so that the SDGs become the core. I'm not reframing the web per se. We create on the web a specific space where the SDGs become the core, where we can align all the interest of the people that wants to contribute, the interest of the teachers, of the learners, of the NGOs, of the policymakers, and create the bricks that are the most useful for engaging people. And that's essentially when we come to learning, that's about courses, internship, job opportunities, etc. So we feel that this is a very interesting way to approach the learning through research, or the challenge-based approach. There's different names. And this is a way where maybe we can engage some of those 200 million of students that today are not as engaged as they would like, even though they are very interested in trying to solve the SDGs. So if you want to discuss this further, we'll be happy to discuss this idea with you after the session. Thank you very much for your attention.
Our next speaker is Dr. Mila Thomas Fuller.
So hello, my name is Mila Fuller, and I'll be talking today about how to empower learners through innovation and knowledge construction. And I'll have resources on the webpage that's displayed. So when you think first about rethinking traditional approaches to education, I want you just for a moment to think about if you had to do something different that you've done all your life. So if you're used to a red light meaning stop, green meaning go, and then you have to switch it up, it becomes a very difficult task, maybe hard. Or if you think about the workday, if we were told one day, instead of having to work 8 hours a day, we could work 2 hours a day for the same pay, maybe that's a different type of tradition. And maybe it's easy to follow. So I want you to think through those lenses as we talk about new approaches today. So looking at the slide today, the focus will be on how best to explore innovation. So I'm thinking about this in terms of students and how can they construct solutions. So typically what we're accustomed to are lessons that lead to the same types of projects. But if we give students opportunities to construct knowledge, we begin to see something that looks very different that's being developed by students. When we then fold in the sustainable development goals, it's now becoming very authentic. And now they have an opportunity to construct solutions to the world's global problems at any age. Now, the second part I want to talk just briefly about is the empathy. And we heard about that this morning. And I think the best way to connect with how do we address these problems is if we make sure that students understand the empathy behind them. And it also drives them to want to find a solution. And then down at the bottom, what's really key is they begin to use not only their own ideas, but opportunities where they can connect with others inside of the classroom and even globally. So I'm not sure if you've had a chance to take a look at the ISTE standards for students and teachers. I'm really going to just focus on the ones for students. But if you just look very closely, what you see is digital citizenship, knowledge construction, being an innovative designer, computational thinker, creative communicator, global collaborator, and then the empowered learner. And that's what we're going to focus on. So when you look here, it's really a focus on how can we give students that autonomy to be able to curate their own resources as they work towards a problem. And if we think about the sustainable development goals, we can actually ask students, how would you solve an issue around poverty? How would you solve an issue around hunger? What would you do if you had an opportunity to create sustainable communities and cities? We can actually give them this opportunity and allow them to be the producers where they're creating artifacts and thinking about those meaningful experiences. I think when we do this, it also makes it very fun for them because it's authentic and it's real. And I'm going to talk just a little bit about how they can even share with others. Now, ISTE not only put out the standards, but also performance indicators. And I don't have a lot of time today, so I'm just going to focus on the performance indicators that's connected to the empowered learner. And so, again, if you think about a student solving a problem that's connected to sustainable development, and the motivation behind it becomes the empathy that they can feel and an understanding that they're doing a greater good by helping to solve this problem with their peers and global, these are the things we begin to see. We see that students begin to plan and they're learning research strategies. You'll hear a lot from researchers during this conference. They also begin to have that opportunity to evaluate their ideas. And what I'll say about the knowledge construction piece, it's a little messy sometimes. It's not always going to be a quiet classroom because we want students to talk about it, to talk through the issues. And they may not always find the answer right away, but that's okay because that learning is happening while they're constructing knowledge and thinking about the solutions. But 3D also talks about how they might pull in relevant resources and tools that you've heard a lot about during this conference. 3C focuses on how best to curate digital resources. So do they know how to look at these resources for credibility? And I think as teachers, it would be very important for us to think about how we don't want to be just a sage on a stage, but we're guiding the learning. And so as we're listening in to what they're talking about, as they're developing resources and coming up with solutions, we're helping to guide their thinking, to reshift them in areas where we're trying to move them in different directions. And ultimately, we're trying to get them to be able to make those connections. And also 3D, I love this one because it moves it from fictitious to real. How can we make sure that they know that what they're developing is real? Well, we can give them opportunities to have authentic audiences, and I'll talk about that shortly. But if you want to reflect and think about, am I doing a good job with empowering them? Am I standing on the side and guiding their learning? What will it look like if they're considered an empowered learner? And so I'm going to display just a few here. One, are they troubleshooting and transferring the knowledge? Are they beginning to create their own learning environments and they're beginning to ask for what they need? Are they looking to digital means to help inform and seek feedback? And then one of the biggest ones would be, are they demonstrating learning by their ability to choose? So instead of telling them exactly how they should do it, are we allowing them, again, that autonomy to choose the right direction to go into? Now, with communicating, when you think about tools overall, and we heard the keynote speaker talk a little bit about the evolution of technology, we've moved from chalk to pens and paper to computers to mobile devices. And what that does for us is that publishing looks different now, even in K-12. So when students have an opportunity to develop an idea and begin to critically think and question, they now have a way to communicate authentically, not just with one another, but globally. So considering blogs or website publishing for them, ways where they can communicate and learn through social media. Are they developing videos? We saw an excellent video this morning that was constructed by children from all over the world. And then are they developing visualizations where it's tapping into their creativity and innovation as they're constructing the knowledge and solving a problem? And it's becoming real now. So this was just a quote that I found in an article by one of the ISTE members. And this past year, I've had a chance to raise awareness of SDG by doing presentations. And one of the things that I'm finding out is that while we're beginning to scratch the surface, the more we talk about the social emotional learning components and we make it real and give them authentic audiences and show them how they can connect with others, we get them closer to believing that they understand how best to solve these problems. And if we just step aside, we'll see some differences. And then last but definitely not least, one of the ways to really see it in a classroom is that end outcome. I've been thinking a lot about problem-based learning, but I would say authentic PBL. And if you want to learn a little bit more about that, there's a wonderful resource by the Buck Institute of Education, and I put the link on the webpage, where it's the high quality framework for problem-based learning, where everything is authentic, relevant, collaborative, creative, and innovative. And so I do believe that if we allow our children to construct knowledge and guide them by the side, we'll make a better world and we'll give them an opportunity to address the SDG goals. So thank you.
To our next speaker.
I'm Mary Calancis. I want to first thank you all for being here. It's wonderful given all the time changes that you're here, but in particular, because we're talking about students, I want to acknowledge the school children who are here today. Can we give them all a clap? Thank you. We are talking about you. We are talking about your future, and it's wonderful that you're here, and I hope you're understanding what we're saying, but you are what our goal is. Great. So I'm going to talk about e-learning in colleges, and much of what we say has been said this morning. We've had a very interesting and exciting morning. But I'm going to remind you of something. I put up this little diagram to remind you that for most of human history, humans have been creative, they've been diverse, they've had many languages, they've had different ways of communicating, they were synesthetic, moving out of different modes of operating, right up until the time we invented this sacred thing we call the book. And for teachers and schools, the book is central to quality, central to control, central to the authentic story, central to the one language you're going to speak in school. So although the book and the university and our public schools, they've only been around for 800 years and the school for only 150 years. Those of us in the room, teachers, educators, students, we've experienced our knowledge through this thing that is created by others, that brings the outside world, digests it in for us, and tells us this is the truth and this is the future. And here we are this moment, and there's something called digital. What does it mean for us? Do we just add a little bit on? Is it about a game? Is it about, you know, some kind of device? Is it some bit of software? I'm going to suggest to you that it's not. Those of you who went to dinner heard the speaker there say that the book changes people's brains. When we move from the complexity of life to the narrowness and the canonical way the book operates, our brain were affected. So how are our brains and our feelings and emotions going to be affected by this that we call a revolution? And I want to tell you, the most revolutionary thing about the digital is this. It's that you can make meaning. You can manufacture meaning. Click alphabetically, in any language, click an image, click a sound. All of us can manufacture meaning in a way we couldn't with the book, because we weren't typesetters, we weren't photographers, we weren't audio. It's the most revolutionary thing we do. And how do we as educators harness that revolutionary potential? So I want you to remember that. So, the first thing I'm going to say is, it is possible for the digital to just reproduce everything the book did and everything the culture of the book did. And in fact it has. And because it has, most educators resist the call of the digital, resist the new tools. They resist, they say, we're a human, a place where humans communicate with each other. We have our traditions, we have our timetables, we have our textbooks. And the most important thing we have, which measures how much you know the book, is the test. And whilst we have the test, and you kids know that, whilst we have the test, everything else doesn't matter. Only what's tested matters. And typically what's tested is some kind of book, or maybe now a digital textbook, which is exactly the same as a book, with a quiz, which is exactly the same as a test. So we've been talking about digital possibilities, but I'm telling you it could also, and mostly is, up to now, pretty much pedagogically the same as what happens within traditional classroom, and even in gaming, although we've heard a lot about gaming as this opens up the world. Much of the games that are out there are about individualism, they're about competitiveness, they're not about collaboration, they're not about solving the problems of the world. So we have to be discerning. But more than that, we have to invent the future. So Bill is going to talk more about the tests later, but I'm going to talk about the 7 affordances that we believe are possible for us as educators. What does the digital afford us that the traditional classroom didn't? Well, the first of all is ubiquitous learning, anywhere, anytime, right? Constant surveillance too, because if you're online all the time, people know what you're doing. It's transparent. The book was like that too, but in this case, with ubiquitous learning, it's not just you and the teacher, it can be you and another student, you and the world, you and anybody actually. So that ubiquitous nature, how do we harness the ubiquitous nature in the tools that we use in classroom? That's one of the affordances. But, sorry, I went a little bit too quickly. In the middle, we've got assessment. Because Bill and I both want to say to you today, if we cannot influence assessment, our battle is uphill. And we heard all the questions from the audience and the teachers earlier this morning about curriculum and assessment. So how does assessment change when the capabilities are ubiquitous, when you can trace what people are doing anywhere, anytime, and not just in the test? The second one is recursive feedback. The digital allows peer-to-peer feedback. It allows you to see everything that you do, whether it's a visual or a symbol, you can capture it. You can give feedback as a learner progresses and not wait till the end when it's too late, right? When you get a mark at the end of a process, it's not helpful to changing what you're doing. It's not about the future. So recursive feedback and formative assessment is an affordance of the digital that makes it more possible than in our traditional one teacher, 30 kids classroom. Multimodal media, we've heard a lot about that. Remember, that's the one revolution. We can invent the world and we can invent meaning across different modes. We can even make things, right, within the digital space. It's a powerful affordance that we rarely use in the way that is possible to use, where learners can create the textbook, they can produce the knowledge, they can share knowledge in multiple forms. Active knowledge making. We've heard other people say this, but learners, students and their teachers need to design their knowledge together. They need to be producers of knowledge, not consumers of knowledge. The book, the alphabetical book, the tests at the end ensure that you're always a consumer, and a consumer of a single idea, of the single truth, of the single reality in the book designed by somebody outside of yourself. But when you're able to curate the world and to use multimodality and to do it anytime, anywhere, you're part of designing meaning and designing the future. And of course, we've heard a lot about collaborative intelligence. So are the tools that you're buying or the tools that you're using, do they encourage and facilitate collaborative intelligence? We hear about the social mind. The new technology, the digital space allows us to make meaning ourselves, to help each other understand the world by interacting with each other, and it puts collaboration central. Metacognition. We know that thinking about how history happens, thinking about how science happens, reflecting on what we've done, reflecting on what somebody else has done, and they reflecting on what we have done, makes knowledge more meaningful than here's the book, here's the chapter, remember it, go to the test, and then move on. So we do need to harness that affordance of the new technology. And of course, differentiated learning. It is possible with the digital to design with an individual one lesson, or with 10 a different lesson, or with somebody else something else. We can harness the parents, we can bring other experts in. The possibilities are enormous if we as educators collaborate as well in the production of these learning experiences. So we offer this to you as the 7 affordances of the digital. It doesn't mean that we use it, we use them all, but what if we did use them? What would it look like? What if we designed digital tools? How many of these affordances do these digital tools actually are able to utilize in order to create transformative learning? And I'll just move to my last slide. What I'm saying to you, and I think we've heard your Chief Minister and others say, we need to move away from the traditional learning which was confined in time and space, which was transmission, which was academic literacies and individual memory, single level content focus and standardized learning, and the student only worked for the teacher. The teacher was the sole source of the knowledge. So as teacher, student, that was it. And you relied on your teacher's goodwill or your teacher's understanding of you. We need to move to what we call new learning, where, as I said, anywhere, anytime, that has to be the way we do it into the future. Doing and making, 20th century meaning-making tools in multimodality, social knowledge, high-level thinking and productive diversity, and a set of relationships where it's student to student, peer to peer, student to teacher, and of course, bringing more into the classroom than the confines of the traditional curriculum allowed. So, Bill will continue with a focus on the role of testing. So thank you very much.
Something very exciting to talk about, which is tests and assessment. It's something that people often groan about, but I'm going to talk about it because it's important, because they often drive the system. And I've got an image here, you might have seen this. This is a bit of a meme on the web. I'm going the wrong direction. A bit of a meme on the web. You might have seen this image already. And what I want to do is I want us help us deconstruct that image and work out what learning means from the perspective of the people in that particular room. So the first thing is learning collaborative? Is learning social? Well, it's not collaborative, it's not social at a couple of levels. One level is nobody can talk to each other. In fact, the most powerful knowledge in the world is made collaboratively. People talk to each other and working together. But the second thing is, they're not allowed to bring any books in. Part of our social inheritance is stuff we can look up, stuff we can find. And the assumption behind this particular learning is that it's entirely individual, entirely isolated from other people, isolated from the world. You can't bring books in, but also that it's individual. It's the stuff that happens between here and here. It's entirely individual. And also the assumption is that what that individual does is turn up and it's long-term memory. It's stuff that you can remember. Now my definition, it's not processes you can do, it's just procedures you can remember and facts that you can remember. So my definition, by the way, of long-term memory is, the very crude definition is, it's whatever lasts until the day after the exam, because after the exam it doesn't really matter a great deal. So, but I'm actually interested in the question of inequality. So what are we doing in that room? Why are we doing it? And why are we not letting people talk to each other? Why is it this individual focus on memory? And this is the person, Henry Goddard, from his book 1920, who invented this idea of the bell curve. So he's working with intelligence, but in fact, what I want to ask you is this what we do with every child in every classroom? So Mary and I might be dealing 1 minute with a grade 4 classroom, you know, little kids coming in, and when they do the test, are we going to give them all the same score? Well, not necessarily. We're going to do this. Or sometimes we're working with medical students who had to get 99% in an exam to get into the medical school, and then we do a test and then we do this to them. So one of the issues around assessment, and this is for me, fits with the Sustainable Development Goals as well, particularly the one around inequality, is that what we're always doing in schools is insisting on inequality. We're creating competition between the students, which is, in order for me to be good, you have to be bad. In order for me to succeed, someone has to fail. In order for me to be excellent, a lot of people have to be mediocre, right? And of course, we want to be down here at the above average, gifted and genius level. But by the way, the technical terms that Goddard used back in 1920 were those ones over there, idiot, imbecile, and moron. And I think we need to learn those distinctions whenever we use those words. So it's that what we do in every moment of schooling, which is targeted assessment, is insisting on eventual inequality, even though we've let people in on the basis that they're more or less the same. Now, technology comes along, and what happens? The answer is nothing. Here are all the kids doing the test. They're all isolated from each other. It's a standardized test. It's asking the same questions. And the assumption is, when we have, you know, in testing theories, there's this thing of discrimination. You know, there's no point in having a question if it doesn't discriminate. And that means it discriminates the ones which are slightly smarter from the ones which are slightly mediocre and the ones that are slightly stupid. We've always got to be doing that. We've always got to be doing this discrimination process. And one of the interesting things about technology is some of the biggest educational technology firms in the world today are Pearsons, who are making a fortune selling tests. And the assumptions that we have in our legacy education systems just haven't changed one little bit. And in many ways, technology's exaggerated everything that was bad in those systems. You know, people live for the test now, and they live in this system. Now, what I want to show you here is just an image. I don't have time to show you actually what's behind it. Mary and I have been working for a few years now on a number of grants we've had in the US from the Gates Foundation, National Science Foundation, the US Department of Education, trying to build alternative digital models of learning where we've kind of worked backwards. We've reverse engineered the testing problem to think about what do we do in learning? How do we change testing in order to change learning? And this is an example which we've tried out with children from grade 4 and above. We've tried out at a graduate level, an undergraduate level in university. And this is actually from our class. And what we have here is a thing that's called an Astor Plot. So this is big data, this is artificial intelligence, it's using all the latest technology. And Astor, if you obscurely, is a flower with a whole lot of petals. It's a daisy, right? So it's like a daisy, and all the petals have different colours. And the outside perimeter of the circle are what our objectives are at the beginning of the course, okay? And what we're measuring down here is a whole lot of things that we're measuring, which includes social interaction. We're having classroom discussions. How much are you contributing to those? We've got projects that involve peer reviewing, where in a peer-reviewed project, you do some work, you give other people feedback, you get feedback, they give you feedback on your feedback, you revise your work, and we're tracking this whole very collaborative social process where your peers are working with you actually in an old-fashioned research process who are giving you feedback the whole time. So there's a whole lot of things happening in this process, and we've divided this into 3 major sectors. So one sector is demonstrated knowledge, which is things we can see that you've learned. Focus is the amount of effort that you're doing, that you've been involved in. And help is, we're going to value your collaborations, which are, we're going to see how much you contributed to other people, we're going to see how people valued your collaboration in the feedback they gave you on your feedback. And we have 20-something different types of data that we're collecting. Now in this particular class, there were 70-odd students, and in fact there were 2 million data points. We were at, over an 8-week class, this is at a graduate level, over an 8-week class there were 2 million data points, and there were, I can't read the number now, but it's something like 9,000 pieces of actionable feedback. Now I've got a lesson here about digital and technology. I have a very, or collectively we have a very pragmatic view of artificial intelligence. It's just adding up stuff that's not practical for humans to add up. It's just calculating things, going over data. So what we couldn't do as teachers is ever look at 2.1 million data points, because that's how much stuff was measurable going on in this class. And we couldn't give 8,000, 9,000 pieces of feedback to students, and most importantly, we couldn't give it to them when they needed it. They need this stuff just on time, just in time, they need it on the fly. This is this word that Mary used, this concept of recursive feedback. So, there's phenomenal potential in these, and by the way, every student has one of these Astor plots. This is the one for the whole class, but everyone has their own, and 100 is you've succeeded, you've done what we've expected. And you're in control of the data, you just watch it along the way, and if you seem like you're not, you know, keeping up or whatever, you just keep on working until you reach that point. So the assumption is, there's no assumption that everyone must be equal, the assumption is everybody can reach these objectives. So when you start the unit of work, or the course, or whatever it might be, there's a 0 in the middle, and it gradually works out to be towards that expectation. And we tell our students, if you get an 80, it's an A+, and just keep on working till you get an A+, because you're in this class, which must mean that we assumed you could have got an A+. So, these are some possibilities here. It's I'll just, that we're looking at higher order thinking along the way. There's a lot of review of that. There's a bigger cognitive range. We're a very broad range of data types. We're looking at discussions, we're looking at peer reviews, we're looking at select response to things. But the big point is number 4, which instead of there being a 3-hour exam at the end of the semester, we are looking at every single thing you do in the class. So it's, instead of it being a sample, a small sample, which is the 3-hour test, N equals all. Everything you do, we're constantly looking at, we're evaluating that data and so on. Embedded assessment's the learner's friend. I'm sure all the people walking into the classroom you saw at the beginning were all very nervous about what's going to happen. But when assessment gives you feedback, embedded assessment is your friend. Logic's recursive, we said that. Intelligence is collaborative because it's about the comments and the reviews you give each other, and every student to succeed. And this is a little conclusion now, my last slide, about how things might change. So this is a kind of comparison between what you might call education 1.0 and the possibilities of education 2.0, which is things could be in the future very, very different in these different kinds of environments and with different kinds of infrastructure. So that's my thought of the day. And by the way, I'll end with one last line, and that is that in what it will be possible to do in these environments is abolish the distinction between instruction and assessment. No more tests.
So we live in a time of unprecedented opportunity, which is also laden with turbulence and peril. And while several recent highly popular accounts of progress present confident, optimistic pictures of the future, there are also contrary accounts which view reductions in poverty, malnutrition, and violence, and improvements in quality of life, life expectancy, sanitation, and standard of living as coming at great cost and risk to the planet's biophysical and ecocultural support system. So in reality, these gains are precarious, and they're easily reversed, as some of these recent books demonstrate. So despite the sanguine assessments of progress and predictions for the future of humanity, our ultimate challenge is to improve quality of life for all on a planet with growing human population and even faster growing production and consumption of almost all things: cars, cell phones, clothing, energy, food, housing, luxury goods, roads, water, hotels, as we're seeing here. So as the UNESCO Rethinking Education report highlights, this requires us to rethink knowledge as how knowledge as a common good is created, acquired, validated, and used. So the question I'd like to begin with is why sustainable well-being societies are not ubiquitous today. And while there are many reasons, I'm only going to talk about one today. And this is a question about how our minds work. And so we're going to talk a little bit about this concept of the relationship between the brain and the mind, and this idea of something called dual process theory. So dual process theory is this idea that our minds have these two sort of control and functioning processes. The first one, as you can see, which I'm calling the preconscious implicit processes, they're fast, they're effortless, they're evolutionarily old, so they're prior to the cognitive revolution when our brains grew very large. They're automatic, and they're high capacity, they're high throughput because they don't draw on short-term memory. It's where our emotions and instincts and sensations, those unconscious sensibilities and aspects of our mind come from, and it's also where intuition and insight and imagination come from. So the non-conscious, we call the non-conscious and unconscious aspects of our mind. But there's also another part, and this other part is evolutionarily new. It's slow, it's demanding, it requires controlled effort, and it's low capacity because it draws on short-term memory. And that's what we call the conscious explicit processes. And those conscious explicit processes include things like deliberation and analysis, and they also include reflection and contemplation. So what we're interested in growing well-being societies is having efficient and effective communication, meaningful communication between those two processes of the mind, so that the more controlled processes, as in meditation, have an influence on shaping and modifying our emotions, and also how we can hone our intuitions and insights through experience, meaningful, deep, rich experience. Okay, so the question when we ask, why sustainable well-being societies are not ubiquitous brings us to this disconnect between our aspirations to advance quality of life for all and our generally unsustainable actions, policies, institutions, choice architectures. And I argue that the reason why that disconnect exists is because we focus really on that inner unquestioning part that's driven by emotion, and we have a grand narrative that guides that. Dominant root metaphors today are grounded in anthropocentrism, in a narrow focus on individualism, in an idea that the planet is a source, an infinite source for raw materials and a waste sink, and that economic growth and technological growth are inherently good and progress is inevitable. As long as that's the dominant metaphor that guides our formal education systems, we're not going to have the transformative change that UNESCO talks about, and we're not going to have ubiquitous well-being societies. Not unless we have life-affirming root metaphors. So those are grounded in identification with all life. They're grounded in this commitment to the common good. They're grounded in a recognition that there are limits to exploitation, both human and the planet as a whole, regenerative use of natural resources, but respectful use of human resources. And this idea that economic and technological growth are neither good nor bad, but that progress is contingent upon the kind of growth, whether it be technology or economies. And this idea is built on a concept of sustainability that I've developed that looks at well-being on the horizontal axis, and on the vertical axis, the per capita draw on natural capital and human capital. So we're trying to get to that small box. We're trying to increase well-being for all to the right, and we're trying to push down the draw on human capital and natural capital to that pink box. So to do this, we've developed a Learning for Sustainability framework to harness and leverage the transformative potential of life-affirming meta-narratives. We need to think about content, which is what we teach, but we also need to think about pedagogy, how we teach what we teach. But even those two things are by no means enough to leverage this potential. We need to think about practice. Do we model our values and our commitments in everything that we do? So as Bhutan creates a happiness indicator for society, do we model that commitment to well-being in everything that we do? How our schools function, how our endowments work, how we collaborate together. And that alone, again, is not enough. As Bill was talking about, we really need to have meaningful assessment that it really addresses how do we actually know that what and how we teach, not just what we teach and how we teach, but both of them together is having the intended impact, or if we need to change. The intended impact is to create citizens that can help create and advance and support well-being societies for all. And to do that, we've also created a framework, Learning for Sustainability Core Competency Framework, and it starts at the bottom with values and commitments. It's not an add-on, it doesn't come later, it's the fundamental framework, that commitment to creating well-being societies that looks at cares of and for the self, cares of and interests of others, and how they tie together to address commitment to the common good and affinity for all life. And then that layers upwards to knowledge and understanding. Integration of tradition with future thinking. So it's both tradition and future thinking integrated together. Systems thinking and dynamics addresses interconnectedness and also addressing state of the planet literacy and numeracy. That is built, creates a firm foundation to build social skills and agency, implementing transformative change, modeling of sustainable behaviors, wise, compassionate decision-making, and empathy, mindfulness, and social learning. And finally, we've done a lot of work, a big project which you can access the book online. It was one of the books that was in that initial lower quadrant. It's called Sustainability, Human Well-Being, and the Future of Education. It's a project that was sponsored by the Finnish government's national think tank, Sitra. But I outlined these heuristics for what I call skillful muddling. So I'll just run through those and leave them up there for a second, because I would like to sort of open up conversation to the panel to see if you have any questions amongst each other. What do you guys think? Or do you want to open questions to the audience as a whole? So we can take some questions from people in the audience. I'm not sure, do you guys have microphones for people? Is there someone that would like to ask a question of one of the speakers, or all of us?
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you for the enlightening session. My question was regarding the BMGF project in public education domain you mentioned and the assessment. So there was what I read was there were a lot of teachers who are being trained to observe the performance of other teachers through video. Would you be able to speak something about experiential performance measurement on that context?
Press it. No, you want to just come up here?
Just to repeat the question, if I understood it, was about assessing teachers with videos. It's kind of a different question in a way, but one of the general problems becomes we have this kind of managerial approach now, and evaluation, assessment, obsession with the whole system. So, in other words, what happens in exams becomes centrally important because teachers end up being measured by the same kinds of things. The business with assessing with videos it's a kind of a different question in a way, but it is, you know, it's something which is increasingly done these days, and I think it's about teacher performance more than anything else. So.
Thank you.
Assessment you can make of students is in what their students do. So it's in the artifacts and the representations of students. You know, that's the measure. Now, you video what they do, maybe, maybe not, but our argument is because you can track everything that a student does, the whole process, how they've engaged, how they've collaborated, you have that if they're working in a cyberspace, that becomes a portfolio of performance. And that's a better way of measuring a teacher, right? Than saying, you know, we're going to watch how many kids you talk to and how many kids you engage with. It always in education, the outcome is the students, what they can do, how they can perform, and how happy they are. Because I think that matters too. I mean, schools for many of our children are just terrible prisons. We just dump them in there. They're removed from the real world. How can they understand those values that you put up when they don't go out to see trees or go out into the forest or know where a chicken lays eggs, or, you know, we just remove them and then put them in a place and test them for all the things that don't matter, right? So let's keep the focus where it is, always on the performance of our learners.
Maybe you can get the mic from back. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today we are discussing about reimagining education to the future. But how can this persist the past moral values which are present in the human being? Where we are shifting ourselves to the total technological drift, the contact between a student and a teacher is increasing. Like if I am binding a student only to technology, how can he understand about how to behave with a friend or how to intermingle with the society when I am taking away from the society?
Well, you know that graph I put up where I said the book closes the world, right? It is possible that the digital might open the world again for us. Open it in terms of the modes of communication, right? Open it up into people that we relate to. And when learners work within a cyberspace, they can, it's not just one kid putting their hand up and having the right answer. All of them can respond to the teacher's question. The teacher can see all the responses, the kids can see the responses to each other. That's the affordance available to us, right? Now they might tell you you can have games and blah, 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 etc. But the real affordance is manufacturing meaning together within these platforms, where you can see each other, where you can talk to each other, where you collaborate, where you help each other make knowledge. That's the affordance. If you have a game that does that, if you have a tool that does that, you're going to get closer to human engagement, to empathy, to problem solving. And that's what I was trying to say in terms of what is afforded, right? And we could show you the classes, examples of classes where little kids, you know, are all writing a response to the question the teacher has, where they're all helping each other. No cheating. It doesn't matter if you cheat, we want you to cheat. There's no failure. Everybody can succeed. You wait till they succeed, you help them to succeed. It's a different ecosystem, different way of thinking. And the digital can't allow that. It's an affordance in the way that before whole of human history was like that. And then the book, the culture of the book, the architecture of the book, all the logic around traditional schooling, which is only 150 years old, was for creating particular citizens in particular nations to do particular jobs. Perhaps the the digital can open us up again, can free us to community relationships and collaborations. That's what we suggest is possible, but you have to create it to make it happen.
Okay, I think there was another question in the back.
Well, hello everyone, and I have a question regarding the assessments only. So I teach in an under-resourced classroom in one of the community areas in Delhi, and we try to follow that model of new learning and other things as well. But the problem is, the kids have to go back to that assessment of traditional learning methods. So what I figured out from the presentation is that those are two mutually exclusive things. Is there any overlapping system where they can, because at the end of the day they have to go back to, right now in India, have to go back to the traditional learning assessment centers, right? So is there some overlapping method by which they can be assessed here and assessed there as well?
But you can also extend it so you can move backwards and forwards. There is the politics of the state. There is, I think, the mind, the work of the mind that you said. We are the more expert we are, the harder it is to change. So we, expert teachers, expert school, the parents know what they want. It's very hard to shift from that. So you are correct. You have to shove backwards and forwards in a practical sense from what they know, deliver to Caesar, and you can in this space, as well as open up to these values of collaborative learning, the social mind, and to prove the value of it in the school. One of the pictures that Bill put up, there is a school which has traditional teaching, traditional exams, traditional books, and the children can choose to move into the place that's called Create. The teachers can choose to move. And in fact, in this other space called Create, where there are citizens, the kids are citizens, they're learning respect, and they're learning to move in and out of the building. Those kids are higher performing than the kids who are stuck in the schools. So yes, we need incremental ways of getting there, but this is a catalytic. We are pushing the boundaries for you.
Right? Two things that AI is doing much better than us. Much better now. So what about the future, right? In 10 years down the road. So if we frame that in terms of sustainability and all the issues that we've been discussing around the values, etc., honestly, what are the deepest thing that we should be assessing? Are you kind enough? Are you empathizing enough? Are you working with the others? Are you able to be creative and to ask the right questions? Are you considering the ethics of what you're doing? It's not about the techniques per se or the science. It's more about the phronesis. Aristotle had those three different dimensions of knowledge: the science, the techne, and the phronesis. And the phronesis has disappeared in the Western world, at least. And the phronesis is the essence of what do you do with your knowledge? What is it for? What is the purpose? And so I think that in terms of assessment, we need to fundamentally rethink what we are building all those minds for, right? Singapore just dropped the notes, as you know. And this is a very interesting commitment, because they were pushing so hard on the kids, they realized that they was jeopardizing their society. So we can follow up on this calculation and memorizing stuff. It's important because it builds the brain, but it's not the alpha and omega of what the school is for. It's just an exercise to do to train the brain. It's not the purpose. So we should have some assessment on the purpose, so that the kids, they grow in an environment where they can contribute positively to the society and reframe what we are in, because we are in up to the neck. So we have to engage collectively everyone that is willing to take up the challenge to reframe everything that we are doing on this planet.
We had one question more, I think, from the back there, over there.
Thank you everyone, first of all, for sharing your thoughts and your research with us. I think, in my experience, society in general looks at school and education as a way to enter the job market, to be financially stable, and that's a very dominant reason why people send their students to school. Communicate their requirements from like young adults, and like how we can leverage that to make sure that they're asking for what we think education should be giving students. I don't know if that's a confusing question, but
adding.
I'll take that question, and maybe someone else will have.
I can add something to the same question. It's like the ongoing discussion.
I'm going to take that question. Excuse me.
I just want to add up something to the same question. I just want to add up something.
How about if we don't address your question, you can add something afterwards? How about that? So I think absolutely we're seeing, in terms of the creation of sustainable well-being societies, we're seeing many companies taking a leading effort in driving that beyond what's happening in many governments and beyond what's happening in local communities. So the whole vision of doing well by doing good is something that we're seeing happening in many, many different companies. So the question is whether the drive towards creating sustainable well-being societies is the raison d'être for our company, or whether increasing wealth is their driving force. That's what I was trying to address early on. And if that driving force is to create sustainable well-being societies, it's not necessarily a conflict to have a profit motive to make sure that your employees are well paid. I don't know if that addressing. Did you want to add something to your question?
Please.
How about we do it? You want to just come right up here?
Okay. So this new kind of assessment.
You just let this young man and we'll get back to you.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Yeah, so before starting my question, I want all of us to travel to the future. Okay, so in the future, there won't be any schools. Everyone will be on their phones and tablets and other electronic devices at homes. They'll study at homes and all. So I'm wondering, what about the teachers? I mean, like 10 to 20% of the world's population is teachers. And if everyone does their stuff on phone, then what will happen to the teachers?
The teacher is the most important part of the education process. If you have $1, 1 rupee to invest it in a teacher. We're not talking about learning by ourselves. We're talking about being in a set of relationships that the teacher curates, that use the cyberball, that supports you to move in and out of scaffolded learning, in and out of goals, opens the world up for you, curates it, helps you curate it. The teacher remains key, but the teacher cannot be a public servant turning the pages of the textbook and making you exam. They have to be a professional. They have to be a researcher. They have to travel the journey with you. It's a different kind of person. So we have to produce different teachers who we trust, who are responsible, who will work with you collaboratively. So it's not just you will change, they need to change.
They'll be at their homes only. It's like education with social media. So in social media, there will be teachers all around the world. Okay, so there's no a single teacher to rely on. So what will happen to their job? What will happen to their salary?
We have to.
No, I'll just answer quickly. You'll still be at school, and this will be the difference. Instead of one person talking at a time, which is the way this room is simultaneously. So these things won't necessarily change classrooms. Ubiquitous learning means the classroom will be radically transformed. The role of the teacher will be very different because they'll be a data analyst and they'll be seeing that somebody over there is not up to date with their work, which they never were able to notice before. So they'll be a different kind of professional and they'll still be in a classroom. And one of the reasons is a purely pragmatic thing, and that is, what are we going to do with children during the day? Right, so a purely pragmatic thing is called duty of care, which is the parents are going to work, they're busy, and the children need to go somewhere, and this is a good place to be. But this environment will be radically transformed by those devices in every kid's hands, as well as the fact that they can do it at home, but they'll still come to school. It's like childcare centres for teachers. No, it's not. In that the teacher's role will be incredibly important and very different. So if I just put 30 children in a room with tablets with no instructions about what to do, what's going to happen, right? It's going to be chaos. So the business of scaffolding, the word I use is scaffolding. You know, when they build a brand new building, they put a scaffold up. The business of architecting those relationships, managing those relationships, noticing that you need help. You're doing really well, but I notice that you need help. I'll come and help with you. So the very last picture, I don't know if you remember the image that I didn't really show very closely, is that the classroom might be big open space, and at one point the teacher's talking to 100 kids, then working with one kid by themselves. Very flexible, not 1 to 30, right? So the teacher's role will be incredibly important, but incredibly different. Pardon? No, there's a very big difference. And the difference, the best analogy is, you're a social media person. It's the difference between being the member of a group on Facebook and the admin, right? So the teacher will be the admin, if you like, who deals with data, who ties the group together. So, and matter of fact, in our environment, we've abolished the word teacher and we have the word admin, because what we've allowed is that some students might be admins, right? So in the environment that we've built, we have the idea of a member of a knowledge community and an admin who takes responsibility for coordination in that knowledge community.
You know, a good teacher is a good teacher is not only someone that provides the knowledge, it's also the person that understands where the student is locked in and try to find a way to unlock that potential. And so whether you have social media, whether you have AI, whatever, you still have a brain, and the brain is full with cognitive biases, with problems and issues, and you can circle around with your group of friends with false information and not be able to, you know, to go beyond a certain stage. So the teachers will still be there, but they will always be there, but in a very different way, much more into mentoring than only providing the content, because the content is elsewhere. So actually it's even better, because they can concentrate on what they do most, what is the essence of teaching, which is very, very important and personal. It's the human part of it that is important.
But isn't AI about having a training? Maybe we can take some further questions after the session is over.
But what I was going to say just in closing is what I really like about what we're seeing right now and what's happening. I mean, it's the perfect example of the knowledge construction, and as educators, the ability to guide students thinking from the side. And what I was going to say, young man, I did hear you earlier when you said the word should be guide, and you're absolutely right. And the other thing is not to forget that you won't lose that human interaction. And so I think that the role of the teacher is that we'll always know the trajectory that you're on and where we're trying to get you so that you can be the best that you can be in education. So don't worry, you won't walk in and never have us to interact with, but those were great questions and we appreciate your thinking. Thank you.
So, thank you, Mila. So thank you again for attending the session. If you would like